Hey, this is Aaron,
And this is Kristen.
and this is the Drive Mode Show.
Welcome to 2021, people.
Yay!
Let's celebrate with a great car.
Really great car. So, we are going to talk about Corvette.
Yes, I have a long love affair with Corvettes. Thanks to my dad. He had a 66, I think, and it was a maroon color. And it was beautiful. I have some pictures of it, but then when I was born, the Corvette went bye-bye. And then it was on to station wagons and vans and stuff like that.
So that's a cool tie-in because you have experience with a C3, a third generation Corvette, and I had the new 8th generation C8 and had the opportunity to put it next to a C3 Corvette. A little bit newer than yours, than your dad's. So it was when they did the 454, which didn't happen until 1971 or 72. And just a wow, phenomenal cars. They've always been great. I don't think there's ever been a bad Corvette. And I don't think any other American sports car can say that. Because, in the 70s, they started to really get crappy for a while. And then there were some, Dodge did a thing with Mitsubishi and as a collaboration and called it and it was just nasty. And then a couple of the Mustangs, there was one or two generations there where they get really cringy. But that's never happened with a Corvette. So it's really cool. And the new one, of course, is a mid-engine. So it's a totally new concept and design for the car.
It really supercar, and it's eye-catching.
Well, it's cool that it's mid-engine because the original design for the car before they changed it was a mid-engine car. So really cool to see that finally happened. Also cool to see that when you put it next to any other Corvette, it still looks like a Corvette. Has the Coke bottle silhouette, has the front fenders, the rear haunches, has all of the things, the curve in the door, has all those things you expect to see in a Corvette, the stingray nose.
I like the edges and I like the curves of a Corvette. There was a period of time, probably in the early 90s, when they kind of squared it off and it lost some of its personality. I like the curves. I love the swoop in the side of the old 50s Vettes. I love the 63 Corvette, even though it's a ridiculous blind spot problem. It's still beautiful. My neighbor across the street has a 63 split window in black, and he has a 66 in red. And those mothers are loud. Every time he pulls them out of the driveway, like lights up the whole neighborhood. My husband's like, ah. And I'm like, yes. And I run to the window and I look for it.
Yeah, that's really awesome. Corvettes have always been an American favorite. And the Corvette has always been the American answer to European sports cars. So out of all the cars you can name, it's the only one really that's an American manufacturer that is competing with those European cars. And now the last two generations, the previous one and this one, they have done really well in Europe, sales-wise. So wonderful to see that. And this new one is just phenomenal. I only have one complaint about the car, and that is that the cockpit is exceedingly driver-centric. So the passenger almost feels kind of left out because they can't see really the infotainment screen.
That's true. It's definitely divided. I think the infotainment center, the system, is a lot better than it was the previous year before they went to the mid-engine design. And I like the idea of having all the controls right here next to me. But you're right. It's almost like being in a cubicle,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
cubicle, low wall next to someone. Like there's no romance. There's no holding hands in the Corvette. It's like, it's all about me. I'm driving and you sit over here and be quiet.
Yeah, that's really is my only complaint. Everything else about it is wonderful. I had the opportunity this summer to drive a McLaren. So I drove the McLaren 570S, and I would honestly say that in terms of drive, so drive quality, the feel of the car, how it feels on the road, and everything else, the McLaren and the Corvette, they're very comparable. The McLaren is better at just about everything, but it's also 3 times the price. So,
At least, right?
What's that?
At least, I mean, the value for the Corvette is spectacular. If you want a good-looking sports car, and people have opinions about the back end, but I think the profile is beautiful. I think they've really improved upon it, and they've made a statement that the Corvette's not going anywhere, and I think that's strong.
It's too bad that photography can't really do the back end justice. Most photos that I've seen of the car, the back end looks like a Camaro, right? It looks too fat. It doesn't look. It looks really blocky or something. But when you see it in real life, that's not the case. There's a lot of subtle little curvature happening. If you look underneath the air wing on the back, there's a little bit of a curve like this. The lights aren't nearly as square in person as they come out to be in photos. And the exhausts are wonderfully tipped. They're really pretty, and they come just right. Like they're just in the right spot. So it's hard to do the car justice with photos because, again, for whatever reason, on camera versus your in-person eyeballs, it just doesn't look the same. But the rear end should be great because that's where the engine is.
Yeah, that's right. And it's not fat, it's thick. THIC, thick.
Hashtag. So the Corvette, I had it in the 2020 model at the most expensive, and so every option available on it, and including convertible. So all the options on it, and it was $84,000. But you can get the Corvette starting out at somewhere around 60. So it's just under $60,000. And comparing that to most other European sports cars, so not comparing to like Challenger or Camaro or Mustang, comparing it to a European sports car, that's way more than price. That's phenomenal.
I agree, and I think it's way better than the Camaro. I used to love the Camaro when I was, a teenager. It was fun. It was newer. That was the cool car then. But I feel like the Camaro's lost a lot of its charm. It really needs an update, and so did the Corvette. So it's going to be interesting to see how the American cars match up.
So news on the Camaro. Scuttlebutt is it's probably going to discontinue after the 2022 or 2023 model.
Right.
It'll probably make a comeback, and I kind of suspect that General Motors has a plan for it, similar to what Ford did with the Mach-E. So I wouldn't be surprised at all to see an electric or electrified Camaro come out by 2025.
That would be cool. I think that would give it the edge that it needs, because right now it's kind of sleepy, like, all right, now what? But and this
enjoy it. Even in its, it is kind of sleepy. It's not the same kind of muscle car as it used to be in like others. But I actually like the V6 version. You've got 305 horsepower out of a 6-cylinder engine. And it feels good in that car. You get the convertible, and you pretty much got it made, and you're still under $50,000. So,
Good point. Mm-hmm. That's a fair point. And I think if you are a Corvette person, you want to be seen. You want people to look at you when you drive, and it does have that roar. It's got that great growl that I like, and it's fun to drive. I mean, it does have I think it has some minor things that could be improved for sure. But overall, I think what they've done with it is spectacular.
Well, I don't remember the price tag exactly. I think it was about $2,700 to add the Z51 package. Best money ever spent. You only gain horsepower, but you gain tons of pipes. The noise changes dramatically when you do that. and it's such a great sound. Beautiful, beautiful sound. Yeah, it's wonderful.
Now this week I have a 2021 Lexus LC 500H, which is a hybrid, so it's different, but it's a beautiful sports car. I think it's highly underrated, but the sound is and the experience is totally different. Like if you want a visceral experience, you want a Corvette with a Z package on it. The Lexus is like, it sounds like a wine when it starts up. My son said, the music of that car sounds like a spaceship.
Okay.
I like that he described his music because.
Yeah. I just got out of the Mercedes AMG GLE 63 SUV. That in the video. Come on. It's but I mean that's an SUV off the line with 603. I want to say it might be 607 horsepower, and the Mercedes, the cool AMG thing where you hit a button and the exhaust gets out.
I know. I like.
But that's a wonderful car and a real sleeper, way more than the Durango Hellcat or something like that. But in comparison to, say, a Corvette, it's a completely different animal. Yes, it's bigger. Yes, it has more horsepower, but it doesn't drive nearly the same because there's only so much you can do with an SUV versus, and it was interesting too because I put the we should talk about the differences between the 2020 and the 2021.
Yeah.
But when I parked it next to my neighbor's 454, third generation Corvette, I did the math to do the power to weight. And it's pretty amazing because the 454, which was the most powerful of that generation, had a power to weight of 1.4 pounds per horsepower. And the 8th generation Corvette in the convertible, which is heavier than the regular, in the convertible with its slightly more horsepower. So the 454 was 460 horsepower. The C8 with the Z51 package is 495. But if you do the math, the power to weight is actually 1.37 pounds per. And so it's interesting to see how very close they've stayed in that one metric, but it's just an illustration of how all the way across they've stayed the same. You can see the same styling, you can see the same everything. Now, fuel economy is a whole lot better, but you got twice the gears. You got 8 now versus 4 then.
It's fascinating to me that you know all those stats off the top of your head.
Car nerd. So anyway, going to the differences between the two. The C8 that I was driving in the 2020 model, it was the convertible, but it did not have adaptive cruise. It did have forward collision warning and braking, but it did not have adaptive cruise. It did not have wireless anything, including charging. There was wireless nothing in the car. And just a lot of little technology points that are becoming the norm weren't there yet. And then in your 2021, I believe all that's there. So.
Yes, and it'll be interesting to see what they improve upon next year. 2020 was a garbage year in a lot of ways, so I think there are some manufacturers who are holding some of their tricks in their bag for next year, and I would too.
Mm-hmm. Well, following General Motors in general, looking at what they do, next year for the Corvette will be packaging. So they'll add some sort of performance or track version. So I totally expect to see that. There's a lot of little things that could be improved. The cockpit, I expect to see, Alcantara, stuff like that. They're going to start throwing at it. Just those sorts of improvements they'll add. And then by 2023 or 4, I'm going to say the 2023 model, that will be when some sort of refresh.
Do you think they'll make the Corvette as an electric?
Oh, for sure. They've already said that. So there will be an all-wheel drive electric. That's the reason for the giant tunnel down there, is to accommodate running the wiring and everything else. And then the reason that the front trunk, isn't any bigger, any wider, is because they had to leave room so that they could put a motor on top of that front axle.
Very cool.
Yeah, I think we're going to see that in 2022. I believe was the year.
Yes, it's clear that electric is the way people are going, but I think there are a lot of problems that are yet to be solved in terms of how to create the batteries, how to dispose of the batteries, you know, the safety issues. And then there's the whole discussion about self-driving cars and Tesla and all that kind of thing that's kind of off to the side. But I think there's a lot to come.
Yeah, there's a lot of things going to happen. We're going to see pretty big changes in the next 5 years. And then I predict that by the time you and I are in our 40s.
A long time now.
So I do predict that by the time our kids are adults, so sometime in the next 10 or 15 years, by that point, I think we're going to have fully self-driving cars with probably all the government regulations required for that. And I think they'll be the norm 10 or 15 years after that. So 2030, 2040, we should have, I mean, hopefully it's not as boring as like Demolition Man or something. I mean, you know, because then you'll have people like me that'll wreck them on purpose just because you want to fill the inside with foam.
You're crazy. Flying Corvette. You know, they keep talking about flying cars, but really the flying cars are vertical takeoff vehicles. They're not flying cars. But I'd really like to have a flying car, you know, like the one daughter. I watched that when I was a kid. Well, it'll be interesting to see what the Corvette does in the next couple of years. But in the meantime, I'm so glad I got to drive it. I really loved the experience and the heritage behind it. You know, really, it strikes a chord for me. You know, my husband's like, it's loud, it's not that great. I'm like, no, you don't understand. Like, it's a Corvette. You know, I think if you have heart, you're going to like it.
You have to hear it. I mean, that's part of the experience. And the other thing, too, is the celebrity factor. When you're driving in that car, everybody knows that you're driving in that car.
Yeah.
You know, when I had the McLaren, I couldn't go anywhere without expecting a 30-minute conversation. And the same thing happened in the Corvette. The difference being that when I was driving the McLaren, there were a large number of people that thought that was the new Corvette. Whereas in the Corvette, everybody knew it was a Corvette. So, there was no question. They just went, that's the Corvette. So,
I had people in my driveway checking it out. Like, my office overlooks the driveway, and I could see the yard guys were all kind of checking it out. And there's a gentleman that lives down the street who has a 2015, I think. And he texted me and said, hey, can I come take your car for a test drive? I was like, no, but you can come over and look at it. You know, he was impressed. He thought it was pretty cool inside. So it's fun to share. Cool.
And it's like I said, it's just iconic. It's very American. So it's a car that every person in America understands. Whether you lived here 2 years or were born here, you know what that car is. So,
yep, I'd say good job, GM.
Yep, very good job. So I guess that's what we got. This has been Aaron.
This is Kristen.
And this was the Drive Mode Show.
Thanks for watching.